Well, while the CBO was warning about our long-term debt, President Obama was trying to put the squeeze on Congress to pass small spending cuts and more tax hikes to avert the looming automatic cuts. With more, Ford O'Connell, chairman of the Civic Forum, and Dan Henniger, deputy director of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. What do you think of the president's, Dan, the president's suggestion here? Does he have it right?
No, I don't think he has it right at all, Jerry. I mean, the CBO in this report, one of their base assumptions is that the sequester's cuts lasts for 10 years. And here's the president today more or less throwing the CBO projections under the bus and saying we can't do these cuts that are in the sequester because they're too deep and they'll harm the economy. So either the CBO has it right or the president has it right. I don't think you can have it both ways.
Can't have it both ways, Ford, but I would assume you think maybe the president doesn't have it right here. Is there any other way to get big cuts? Do we have to take the sequester? What's the right thing to do here?
Well, Senate Democrats are mulling that over right now in a retreat in Annapolis, Maryland, and the Senate House Democrats are doing that in Virginia. I think that there's a way to do this, but we have to get serious about what's really driving the deficit, and that's health care costs. And right now, the president is not serious about making spending cuts. He honestly thinks that we can raise taxes and lower the deficit. But at the end of the day, we all know what's driving this, and that's entitlements, and the president doesn't really want to touch it. So until the president gets serious about this, we're going to continue with these astronomical deficits.
Astronomical deficits, but I got to tell you, Dan, I look at what the CBO is saying about the economy. It's really scary.
Yeah, I totally agree. The most depressing number up there was growth for this year, 1.4%. I mean, that's barely the heart beating at all.
Barely turning over.
And it was 1.9% last year. And you're talking about 8% unemployment again through this year. And they think it'll get up to 3% next year. But I think that's a very optimistic projection on their part. The question is, why would you expect the economy to grow at greater than 2% going forward after next year? And I'll tell you this, Jerry, I think this is going to create a political problem for the president. Because if the unemployment rate gets up to 8 and above, Democrats are going to start to get very nervous if his approval rating begins to fall. And I think they may start separating themselves a little bit from the president.
You know, Ford, you said the Democrats are on a retreat. Now, I know when you get a bunch of them in a room, they start talking about tax increases. Is that, I mean, that's what you keep hearing from Harry Reid and others. We need more tax hikes. It's not really spending cuts we need here. When are they going to back off the tax hikes? They've already gotten tax hikes, but they don't seem satisfied with it.
No, they don't, because they honestly don't think they need to cut back spending in a serious way. They don't see the growth in Medicare and Medicaid spending as being a problem, even though the CBO says that eventually, at the rate we're going to be an assisted living home with the military until we can't afford the military anymore. But the bottom line is, by continuing to push sort of these tax hikes, what they're doing is they're creating uncertainty in the private sector because they don't know what it is that's going to come down to them. And until they actually have any sort of certainty, we're not going to grow the private sector. And basically, the president sort of kicked the can down the road with the public sector budget is really hurting the private sector. And until we pay more attention to the private sector, growth is just going to be stagnant.
You agree, Dan?
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with Ford. I think the problem for the Democrats is that the contemporary Democratic Party has essentially separated itself from the private economy. They are now about the care and feeding of the public economy, and all of these programs they created is the only thing they seem to understand and care about right now. The private economy, in their view, is either on its own or its job is, send revenue via tax increases to the public economy. The two parties could not be farther apart, and I suspect we're going to see another year of fiscal gridlock because they simply are not singing from the same hymnal. They're not even on the same economic planet.
I don't think they're in the same church or the same county or the same town. Ford, Dan's talking about all this money to the public economy. What about the private economy? This is what the thing that's really got to jumpstart. If you're telling me the growth is going to be under 2%, 1.4% this year, I mean, everybody's on the sidelines. They don't want to commit to anything. We seem stuck in stasis, not just in Washington, which we're all used to complaining about, but also in the CEO's office, the CFO's office. They don't want to do anything either.
Nobody wants to do anything because they're unsure about what they're going to have to pay 4 to 5 years down the road, particularly if you're a small business owner. And small business is really the engine for the private sector. And until we have any sort of certainty based on the sort of kicking the can down the road that goes on in Washington, this is going to continue. But the sad part is when the growth is so low, all we're going to do is put more people on the public dole and create a bigger culture of dependency.
Yeah.
And as such, the private sector may never get off the ground unless we sort of break this thinking the government is the answer to all of our problems.
But okay, but spending cuts. Do we take the sequester? It's $43 billion in defense cuts, non-defense cuts $42 billion, $85 billion total. Is that the right way to do it?
I think it probably is the right way to do it, Gerri. I think the United States has to send a signal to its own private sector and to the world, even to the ratings agencies, that we are capable of cutting that spending. Because the alternative is a continuous upward path. And until the United States proves that it can reduce public spending, Europe, the rest of the world, is not going to do it, and the world economy is going to grow at an unacceptably low rate long term.
You know, it's all gimmicks. It's all head fakes, fake outs. Ford to you. I mean, interesting to say we've got to slow down the trajectory of growth, but that's all we ever talk about. We never talk about real cuts. We talk about slowing down the growth. They are two different things.
That's absolutely right, and that's why we got into the sequester in the first place, because we knew that we'd make a deal so awful that we'd have to negotiate. But the president doesn't want to negotiate.
No.
He wants to sidestep it. So I have to agree with Dan. Until somebody comes forward with a better plan, I think we're going to have to go through with a sequester, because we have to send a message to our own government and to the rest of the world that you have to balance your books.
I don't like those CBO economists. That's depressing. Ford and Dan, thanks for coming on tonight. A pleasure seeing both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerri.